Major Darren Ivey is our speaker today. He's been a reader with Lead2Read for several years and on his own recruited 80 people who work for the police department. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're good.
Thanks, Jenny. I asked her, when she said, can I do your introduction? I say, yes, just tell them I'm Darren and I can take care of the rest. Because normally, I don't know if any of you ever speak before, but nothing's more embarrassing as people are reading a bio of you and you're just kind of sitting there and they're just reading and reading and reading. So thanks for doing it this way. I have been a reader for the last 2 years and I'm getting ready to start. I had to miss the first semester due to a police department commitment. I'm getting ready to start next week again for my 3rd year. And I'll talk about my readers during this time that we have together. How many of you heard me speak when we were at the last place? Anybody? Okay, just one, which is good, because at the time I was not expecting to repeat this. I thought it was a one and done, so I didn't keep a whole lot of notes besides my presentation notes of what I was going to talk, how I was going to do it. So can't promise it'll be as good as last time, or if it was awful last time, hopefully it'll be better this time. I have been a police officer with Kansas City for 25 years. Prior to that, I was in the military during the Desert Storm era for 10 years. So I have been a police officer for 35 years now, which is seems like just the other day when I think back on it. Now that I think about it, but I'm getting down close to the end of my career. I have to go in the next 10 years, and I probably will go in the next 7 years. So the thought of actually getting to retire in the next 7 years kind of excites me. So that's kind of cool. But that's not why we're here. We are here because one of my duties with the Kansas City Police Department has been, for the last 5 years, the Crisis Intervention Team Commander. And if you've never heard of CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team, it is an incredible program started in Memphis, Tennessee about 25 years ago. And it is where we train police officers, that start off as police officers, and that's what it's intended for, but we've expanded beyond that, on how to deal with those suffering from mental and emotional crisis. So they deal with those who are mentally ill, as well as maybe someone who's just going through a crisis at that time. We have had a very successful program. I have over 500 trained police officers in Kansas City. And it was a program that I was approached by Marsha Morgan, who used to be the COO of Truman Medical Center's Behavioral Health Unit at the time. And she asked me if I'd be interested in introducing trauma-informed care in our CIT programs. And I didn't know anything about trauma-informed care at the time, but I said, absolutely, let's go ahead and try it once I learned a little bit about it. And it was actually, we offered it in all of our basic CIT courses. That's the 5-day, 40-hour course where it certifies. We also have some advanced courses. We offer 2 to 3 hours of trauma-informed care, and it was actually quite successful when we started introducing it. So I kind of latched onto it myself, and we're going to talk about trauma-informed care because it is quite the mind-changing attitude shift once you learn about it. And I have a slide that talks about it, but I'll give you the Cliff Note version even before you see the slide. It is changing your attitude when you're talking to people or looking at people, and you stop saying, what is wrong with that person, to what has happened to that person. Because trauma, believe it or not, we don't talk about it much in the United States, but trauma, especially childhood trauma, is one of the leading epidemics of our century right now, is what the CDC says. That is how severe it is. I could give you book after book after book that would say, that tells you simple statistics like this. If we were to eliminate domestic violence or child abuse out of our world, if we could just take an eraser and erase it and go back even 10 years and erase those 2 words out of our vocabulary, there would be no prisons in this world. There would be very few mental health hospitals in this world. There would be very few drug addictions in this world. That is how impactful that childhood trauma truly is. It's hard to believe, but that is how impactful that it is. And that's why when we started introducing this, it became more than just about children. We started developing programming on how police officers and first responders and social workers, how they could deal with trauma, because your brain really does not care if it's your trauma, something that happened to you, or somebody that happened to somebody else. So in my case as a police officer, there's not a lot of trauma that actually happens to me unless you happen to be one of those rare ones who have been involved in several shootings. But what happens on a police officer on a daily basis is we respond to dead bodies every day. We respond to family in crisis. We respond to these horrific crime scenes. And your brain looks at that and says, don't care if it's not your trauma, Darren, I'm treating it the exact same way. And that is what we have the problem with our first responders and our social workers and our caregivers in this world, really spiraling in their own personal lives, which then in turn starts affecting the community, because if I'm spiraling in my personal life because of a lot of stuff, then I come into, as a police officer, into your world, chances are I'm going to start traumatizing you, and then you're working with these children, chances are you could start traumatizing them. So it's a vicious, vicious cycle, which is why I love when people ask me to come to speak about trauma and trauma-informed care. Excuse me, I have to walk back once in a while to refer to my notes here and to grab my clicker. All right, so I told you this is my third year in Lead to Read, and my first year, both years I've been at King Elementary, and I'll be back at King Elementary, which is at about 50th and Woodland, right behind Paseo High School, if you don't know where that is. And I wanted to be back there again because I work with a couple of their programs there. And I'll tell you what, my first year in Lead to Read just amazed me. So we only had about 20 police officers or police employees that year. And I got me and another police captain, I was a captain at the time, his name is Tim Hernandez, we're assigned to the same room. And of course we wear uniforms when we can, so children can identify with us. And that very first year we all, has anybody read at King Elementary, just out of curiosity? Okay. They have an incredible first grade teacher there who, man, I'll tell you what, she's like everybody's grandma or mom, and she keeps everybody in shape. And her children, believe it or not, most of her children in her classroom leave her first grade classroom reading at a third or fourth grade level. Yeah. Yes, because of the way she runs. Even Lead to Read, we had to read out of her approved text that the children had given to them, that all their reading tests were based off of. That's what we read off of. And if we didn't want to abide by that, then we were free to leave her classroom. She's a great, great lady. She's a great person for this entire community. I'm hoping she won't retire on us anytime soon. But she had us line up out in the room, and it was almost like a game show. She would call us in one at a time to meet with our student. And my student's name was Adriana that year. And she, when they announced me first, I was the second reader that came into the room, and I felt so sorry for everybody else after that point. Because as soon as I came in uniform, every single kid in the room started like clapping and standing up and saying, I want him, I want him, I want him, I want him, which was a great feeling. And then Tim Hernandez was right behind me, and they called Tim in and matched him with his reader, and the exact same thing happened. And then unfortunately, I felt sorry for the fourth person in line who was right after Tim. Of course, they called that person in and nothing happened. And so everybody gave us a hard time the rest of the year about a hard act to follow. But that was a great reception, including when I got with Adriana, where she came up and gave me this big, gigantic hug, as well as all the other kids did. And I said, this is going to be pretty great. And what I found out about her is because she was reading at an advanced grade level. My son, actually the same age as, he was in the first grade at the time. His name's Matthew. And he reads at an advanced level, and she was matching him word for word, because I read with him every night, or my wife does. And it got to a point with her that I actually had to find games to keep her occupied, because she was such an advanced reader, she got bored very quickly. It is very cool. Very cool. But let's go to year two. And year two was last year, and Shauna was my reader, and I walked in the room, and the teacher did the exact same type of a setup, and every kid in the room wanted me for a reader, except for who? Shauna, who looked down at the ground, who refused to make eye contact with me, who didn't want anything to do with me. And we'll talk about during this presentation why that was and what the difference between these two children were. I'm going to refer to both of them all day long, because I think it's important for you to see through your experiences. You may have already noticed the same things, how each child you come in contact with, even if you're going to have multiple in that room, all are coming from different places. And the places they're coming from and the things they've been exposed to are going to shape their lives, the rest of their lives, and it's already started shaping their lives. And you're going to start seeing those as we go. All right, and I'm not quite on as much as a time crunch today, so if you be patient with me, I'm going to probably spend a little bit more time on some of the things that I couldn't do last time. So let's talk about trauma, because I told you this is about trauma-informed care. This is a definition from a gentleman by the name of Bessel van der Kolk, who is the leading trauma theorist in the world. And anybody who has done it, I don't know if you guys have done your self-study on trauma, that is the book you want to read. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, or get it on Audible, because it's kind of a thick read. But Bessel van der Kolk says traumatization occurs when both your internal and your external resources are inadequate to cope with an external threat. All right, sounds a little bookish when you first hear that. Internal, external resources, but that's the key to it. Because what we know in our life is we can lessen external threats that are going to happen to us by not putting ourselves in certain positions, but we know we have absolutely no control over external threats, ever. They're external, we have no control. All we can do is hope to lessen them. But we all have internal and external resources, every single one of us. And an internal resource is things that reside inside of you that help you get through the crap of the world on a daily basis. So I'll give you an example of that. Mine is faith. Faith and hope. I'll steal the two ones because hope is my guiding principle. I'm a very hopeful person. And then faith is another one. So keeping those type of examples in mind, what are some other internal resources that maybe you all have that kind of help you? Things that reside in you. Compassion's a big one. Determination. Self-confidence, very good. You guys are doing better than my classes normally, but keep on going. What is it? Courage, absolutely. Love, yes. Resilience, yes. We're going to talk about resilience. What else? Good health, all right. And let me throw two at you that nobody ever brings up, but it's something I thought of when we first designed this training, and I wanted to make sure they're always brought up. Because a lot of your children may not have these two. A sense of safety, number one. And a sense of security, number two. Those are all internal resources. All right, so keep those in mind. No, you know what? Let's stop and talk about those. We just talked about those are yours. Those are some really good ones that you guys came up with. Now think about your reader, your personal reader right now. What are some of those that your personal reader does not have in their life? Anybody? Encouragement's I would almost guarantee it. We're not in the house. We don't know that, but from what we know data-wise, I would almost guarantee that. Absolutely. What else? You think your children, your readers, have a sense of security in their life? Or a sense of safety? If they grow up in the urban core of Kansas City, my guess is no. I've been doing this job for... Oh, absolutely not, ma'am. Mm-mm. Nope. Nope.
I was thinking like that wonderful first grade teacher. I bet they did in that room.
In that room, absolutely. Yeah, we took a gun off of an 11-year-old yesterday in school.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's why I say I bet they don't have that sense of security or safety. And anybody who's seen the bullying that's going on in the elementary schools of actually the nation, but I'll pick on Kansas City, and that's not even just urban schools, it's suburban schools too. I can't imagine how any child would feel safe or secure in school, to tell you the truth. All right, so security would be knowing that when they go home that night, that afternoon, that maybe there's parents there, that maybe that house that they left that morning, that they're still going to go back to that house that night, or maybe that there's food in that house when they get home, as opposed to safety, which we'll just use the generic safety. All right, so let's go to the external resources that you guys have in your lives. These are things that reside outside of you, like friends, family, and peers. So use that as an example. What are some other things? Finances, big one. I always tell my groups, money can't buy happiness, but I want to put that to the test just once. Somebody give me enough money to put it to the test. But you know what it does buy? It does buy medical coverage, doesn't it? It does buy food. It does buy a house over our heads. Buy security. Buy safety. All right, so what are some other things?
Your environment.
Okay.
The neighborhood you live in.
Right.
Police department.
Yep, physical environment. I'm sorry? Yes, absolutely. Stable family. What about pets? Think about your life. Most people who have pets, they have pets for a reason. They bring them great comfort. Music's another one. Believe it or not, water. Just plain clear water that we take for granted at times. There's a physical effect that we often take for granted. Here's one. I don't even know if you want to call this internal or external resource. It's up to you. Affection. There's nothing more powerful in this world than a hug. When you hug somebody, it releases hormones in you and as well as that person, as long as it was a welcome hug. I must clarify that no other activity can actually match. Another one is actually crying, believe it or not. Crying releases a bunch of cleansing chemicals inside your body. And if a child grows up with the belief that they're not ever allowed to cry, that you're weak if you cry, imagine growing up like that. So taking that into consideration, once again, you don't have to answer this time, think, what is your reader lacking? What is you think in your, and maybe you need to know a little bit about your reader as much as possible, because we can't do a whole lot with Lead to Read. We're not allowed to give them gifts, except for that last time. And that last time is an incredible thing when you've got to give them their books, because maybe that's the first gift they've gotten in a long time. But there is ways to give them sense of security, sense of belonging. So keep that in mind. Know that traumatization occurs when your internal, external resources are inadequate. So find out what your readers' internal, external resources are without being too prying. You can do that in conversation, and maybe you can add to their resources by what they're lacking. And a lot of times it's going to be nothing more than the attention, the affection that you're allowed to show, etc. Make sure I'm not going to go to my video. All right, so how does trauma, or what does trauma do? It shapes a person's beliefs about their identity, their worldview, and their spirituality. Did anybody here grow up in the urban core of Kansas City or another major city? Okay, kind of, sort of. All right, one or two. I will tell you, my children have grown up in the suburbs, and my children never, ever, ever had to worry about drive-by shootings. Both of my readers, I knew where they grew up, and both of them told me they've spent many a night sleeping in their bathtub. You think that what they're exposed to didn't shape their worldview about things? And that's something we need to keep in consideration, because we often think that everybody grows up like us. Everybody lives like us. But that's not true. And is that not part of that resource that we just got done talking about? And now, since they didn't have it, it shaped their whole worldview. It creates symptoms that are adaptations. We see it as a problem. It's their solution. I won't use a child for an example, because you can come up with your own. But let me use an obese woman. In Van der Kolk's book, he talks about it. And he talked about he met this lady who was about 450 pounds. He started off as a psychotherapist and a psychologist and eventually a psychiatrist. And one of his first jobs had to do with a weight loss clinic that they were working at at a hospital. And he didn't see her for about a year and a half later, until about a year and a half later, and she had lost close to 200 pounds. Very svelte. She went through the program, was feeling great about herself, was really, really happy. And he didn't see her again for about a year, and he saw her next time, and she gained all the way back and then some. What do you think happened? Kind of, sort of. You're on the right path. Here's what happened. Eventually, because men started paying attention to her. They started asking her out. They started making inappropriate comments, stuff like that. And what no one knew, or maybe her doctors did, is she was a sexual assault childhood survivor. She ate as a comfort. She ate to mask that pain, to deal with that pain. She lost all the weight. It brought back all that trauma. What did she do? She went back to that again. Now, I tell you that because if you, and you have to be honest with yourself, I'm not going to make you do it here, but I've heard the comments before. I've made the comments before. If you were to go to a restaurant right now and you saw a 400-pound woman going up to the buffet line, what are you going to think? Are you going to think, oh, I wonder if she's a childhood sexual assault survivor? Or are you thinking, no self-control? Better get up to the line before she does. Comments like that. See, we see that as a problem, right? Wasn't that her solution to her trauma? And your children, folks, that you're reading with are no different. They may be dirty and smelly because maybe, and it may be we may think they don't have a bath. It could be something as simple, because we see this with our homeless females all the time, that if they make themselves dirty and nasty, maybe they won't be sexually assaulted when they go home that afternoon. So our problem is their solution. And that's what trauma does, and we need to kind of keep that in mind. It also affects our neuro and physiological development. I'm not going to go into that because I got a great little 2-minute Harvard brain video that I'm going to show you right now instead, which will talk much better about that than me.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
It's a great website if you ever want to get these little short videos and learn more about what trauma or brain development does, which is great for us to know. I know we're not teachers, but it's the more information you know about brain development, you can be that much better of a mentor to these children. All right, so doesn't it amaze you that we as a country haven't done anything about this before? We know this information, and we are so far behind the times on how do we correct this. So the good thing about it is you guys are in that place. Now, yes, their brains have maybe for the last, if you're reading with first graders, 7 years, have not had you in their life. But that's short 30 minutes you're spending with them each week. That is huge, and we're going to talk about that. And that's part of that brain development. That's part of that nurturing you're actually providing for them. Their brains are not fully developed until they're 26 years old. All right, 26 years old. And that's the last part of it, the prefrontal cortex, of where a lot of your cognitive thought process is coming from. All right, so if you want to know what that looks like, one of the handouts at the top part of it, you'll see common things of fight, flight, or freeze. Kind of know what those are. Because remember, a lot of these children are in a chronic state of stress and a hyper-aroused stress. And so maybe something you do might put them over into even more of a stress response. So maybe you can start recognizing some of these signs and symptoms. One thing we do know about trauma is trauma always represents loss. Always. Sometimes it's a loss of safety, loss of security. It's a loss of, it could be a loss of a person. It could be a loss of love, hope, all those resources we talked about. Trauma always will represent that. And this is something I always throw out there just as a reminder that the children you're reading with, it doesn't matter, unless I don't think we have any really big suburban schools that are really reading in Kansas City. Chances are at least half of your children have been affected by some sort of trauma in their life, would be my guess, from what I know of these classrooms, at least where I've been reading that. So what are some losses associated? We talked about the sense of safety in the world. Loss of attachment relationships. That's a big one, and that's where you guys come in there. And you'll see this because I told you about Shauna, and what I didn't know about why Shauna felt the way she did is that two of her, I believe it was two, maybe just one, but I think it was two of her older siblings had been killed. Both boys, and they'd both been killed. She was 8 years old last year, and she was helping to kind of raise one child and a niece in that same household. So you know she has a loss of childhood, right? And she has a lot of that loss of attachment in relationships, and that's why when she saw me, she didn't have that same feeling as Adriana the year before, because police to her represented bad. They're either going to take somebody to jail, or there's something going on the block, or maybe in her life it's been they're the ones who came to the house to told them that her brothers were dead. Any of your children have to go through that, just out of curiosity? Not many of us. Many of us haven't had to do that. Loss of self-esteem. That's a great way for we to help fill that gap. I told you I had to come up with games for Adriana, and that's because I wanted to keep her interested. And you know what a lot of the times it was? It was my cell phone. And she couldn't play on it, but she knew there was pictures on it, so she wanted to see pictures of my family. And when she saw pictures of Matthew, and I told her he was the same age, I brought her all into my whole family life. She knew who my wife was by name, by picture. She knew my older children. She knew Matthew. And that's how I could keep her motivated, because we would talk about Matthew, and then I get her to read. And then we would play other little silly games, but she needed that attachment, I guess. She felt like she was part of something, and once I could identify that, it was something that I could easily do without breaking the Lead to Read rules. Because you know what they really want you to do, a lot of them, and I made the first mistake with her. Someone had to correct me on it because I didn't realize it. She'd always want to sit in my lap. We'd sit on the floor, Indian style, and she'd want to sit right there in my lap and read a book. Like I said, I have an 8-year-old, or matched her age, was 6 back then, 6 or 7. That's how we read. So I thought there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, I know I'm not a pedophile. I know there's nothing wrong with that in my brain. But then I realized, oh wait, Lead to Read probably doesn't like that so much, which they don't. But we found another way. We would sit next to each other, and we would just let our feet touch each other. So she had that connection without me violating the rule, and that was very important to her. I'm not sure. Shauna never really came to that point last year. However, we came to other ways to kind of give her a little bit more of that connection as well. Loss of conflict resolution skills. I bring that up to you because I don't know about you, but both of my readers have come to me constantly with issues going on in the schools. I don't know if you've run across the same thing where they're talking about some problems they're having with some of the kids. And if you don't have a child that age, maybe you've forgotten. Thank goodness I was reintroduced to a child that age with my son, so I understand that's going on. But since they don't have those skills, they may look for you for those skills too. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind. Triggers. All right, so what is a trigger? A trigger is something trauma is always going to attach itself to a sense, always. A sense of sight, a sense of smell, hearing, feeling, or taste. And that's your brain's way of keeping you alive. And I apologize if anybody in this room is a sexual assault survivor and I trigger you this, but I'll use this as an example. If you were a sexual assault survivor and you smell a certain cologne, which brings you back to that sexual assault, that is a trigger. It triggers you back into an emotional or a stress response. To me, it is, believe it or not, it is a phone call in the middle of the night. Because a phone call in the middle of the night when you have adult children are only bad things. They're either in trouble or something has happened. So every time my phone rings in the middle of the night, and as a police commander, my phone rings in the middle of the night, it puts me into full-fledged stress response. Full-fledged stress response. Somebody have a question? I saw a hand out of the corner of my eyes. Okay, I'm sorry. So odor. Let's talk about odor. I've kind of brought up the sexual assault thing. An odor will usually bring back flashbacks of some sort of traumatic experience. So it could be something as simple as the perfume, but believe it or not, it could be something as simple as cigarette smell. If you're a smoker, and the smell of the cigarettes on your clothes may do that. Taste. Here's one I didn't know about until I started getting heavily involved in this, and that is candy. So how many of you have ever offered candy or snuck a piece of candy to one of your readers? And you don't have to answer this because we know we're not allowed to, but I see it happen all the time.
We don't always make it.
Yeah, no. It's not illegal unless you get caught. But this is what I found out, and I guarantee you I follow the rules in this case, because many times childhood sexual assault victims are given candy to be quiet, to not tell anybody about it. Yeah. See, that's the awareness piece we really need to know about, because we think that's nothing, but they think that's any. Touch, a sense of touch, and that's obvious. You know what that could do, but sometimes it's not necessarily a sexual assault. It could be just a violent assault of any sort. So maybe it's nothing more than here's a mistake I made last year. And remember, I'm as trauma informed as you can get. And I saw a young man, probably a fourth grader, who was in the stairwell. His teacher had sent him out there. I did not know that, but it wouldn't have mattered to me anyways. And he was obviously in distress. His head was buried on the banister, and you could tell he was very upset. And the caregiver in me walked up as I was walking down the stairs. I just put my hand on his shoulder, and I said, "You all right, buddy? Anything I can do?" How do you think it was received? Get your effing hands off me. Now, if I was not a trauma-informed person, I might have took a little offense to that, right? A young fourth grader just told me that. But then I realized it was actually my mistake, because I didn't have permission to touch him. And it was in a very loving manner that I did that, a sense of touch. But just because a sense of touch is soothing to me does not mean it's soothing to everybody else in that world. And that's what we have to keep in mind. Sights, believe it or not, sights are usually just locations. But in my case, remember with Shauna, what do you think was a trigger for her? What I wear. And we wear this on purpose to try to get the kids used to this in a good manner. I had to back off of that a little bit, and I would introduce it a little bit at a time. So a lot of times I would wear a slacks and a polo with just my badge, and then I'd wear a uniform. And then maybe the next time I'd back off it again, just to reintroduce her or introduce her to the fact that this is okay. This is okay, but I had...
You're a real person, not just a police person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I also have to be, no matter what I want, I have to be cognizant of what her needs are, not my needs. And her needs were to not be triggered by my uniform until we got to that point. Some of the nonverbal indicators, by the way, same sheet at the bottom of this, you have all kinds of triggers right there. And that's why I give these to you. This is some really good information. Well, you know what? I think we already talked about all that. We did pretty good. Nonverbal indicators of discomfort, distress, or disassociation. I talked about that at the beginning. But really pay attention to your readers. Especially on day one, if they are really cowering away from you, if their fists are clenched, if they're as tight as a coil, whatever else you can think of on that list, something, I hate to say a warning sign, it's an indicator. It's an indicator to you that maybe I need to look at maybe doing something differently, and at least in week 2, and see if we have the same issues all over again, or maybe that was just having a bad day. Because remember, we're talking 6, 7, 8-year-old children. They have bad days. They're just like us. In fact, they have even worse days than us because they don't have the regular self-regulation skills that we've developed over the time to really get over it, and the only way they can really express themselves is to do it in some sort of manner that we usually see as a problem. I look at my notes because I'm afraid I'm going to click on a video without telling you. And I'm glad I did, because I am. All right, so we're getting ready to watch a video, and these kids are going to tell you the best way that we're teaching them in some of these schools on how to deal with a lot of the stuff they deal with on a daily basis. But pay attention, because this is just as good as for you, and we'll talk about that at the end of the video.
I get really mad when my brother hits me a lot.
I don't like it when you say you don't want to play with me.
When I'm mad, my brain can get a headache and it can start hurting.
Your blood keeps pumping because you're like really mad. And you start to get sweaty because you're getting really, really mad. And then when you start getting really mad, you turn red.
When your body can't really control yourself, mad just takes over your body.
I just get out of control.
It's kind of like if you had a jar, and then the jar would be your brain, and then you put glitter in the jar, and that would be how you would feel like. If you shook up the jar and the glitter went everywhere, that would be how your mind looks. And it's like spinning around, and then you don't have any time to think.
And you sometimes punch stuff and people when you don't really mean it.
When I get angry, I feel it in my heart.
I really don't like when I get angry. The amygdala really reacts, but the prefrontal cortex tries to keep it down. When I feel like I want to, get really angry and yell, I just sometimes, take deep breaths. First you find a place where you can be alone, then you find some way to relax and calm down. When I need to calm down, I take deep breaths. I breathe in through my nose. Sometimes I close my eyes or just take deep breaths.
It's calming down. It's not moving. It's slowing down and then it stops. And the heart pumps slow and then it goes into your brain.
It's like all the sparkles are at the bottom of your brain. My brain slows down and then I feel more calm and then I'm ready to speak to that person.
That is one of my favorite videos. I love this video because it reminds me of what I teach people and first responders. And this is what we're teaching them actually, is to breathe. And that sounds silly, but we forgot, folks, as a human being, how to breathe. Have you ever watched a baby breathe before? Their little tummies rise up and down because they're breathing right. And then as they're getting a little bit older, the stress response kicks in and they are like us and they start breathing out of their chest. So this is important for these kids. We're actually teaching this to kids across the country, not me personally, but these trauma-sensitive schools. And we have some in Kansas City that are working on this type of stuff. It's not about yelling at the kids anymore. It's not about disciplining them all the time. It's teaching them skills. And this is the number one skill we can teach them, is just to breathe. And guess what? It's just as good for you. And that's why we're going to do it right now. Because this is what I want you to do on your way over to the school. Because you're going to be in the best place when you're dealing with these children. Because when you go to read, you're coming from work normally, right? And a lot is on your mind probably. If you're anything like me, no matter how much you love reading and you wouldn't change it for the world, it's your favorite time of the week, there's some days that you say, oh God, I gotta go read. When all you really want to do is stay at your desk and finish what you're so far behind on. Our readers can pick up on that. They really can. So here's what I want you to do. We're gonna practice this. Everybody get really comfortable, because believe it or not, you all forgot to breathe, how to breathe. I've been watching you all a half hour. Put one hand on your belly, one hand on your chest. Now relax your belly. You should have a little Buddha belly. I don't care how skinny you are, you'll have a little Buddha belly. And what I want you to do, you want to close your eyes, that's fine, but take a deep breath for about 5 seconds through your nose, and your hand on your belly should rise. Should look like this. Hold it for about 5 seconds. And then release through your mouth. It took you 5 to inhale, should take you at least 6 to exhale. 1 more second. So do it a couple times by yourself. If you're that good that you breathe out of your belly anyways, take your hands down. It's just nothing more than to get you used to it. I'm going to shut up and let you do a couple cycles. Five seconds. All right, this is about Lead to Read today and dealing with traumatized children. So I tell you that for that. But let me tell you what, we teach this everywhere. If you have a hard time sleeping at night, if you're like me, do this. You will go to sleep. Usually within 5 to 10 minutes. If you just sit there on your bed with your eyes closed and the room dark and try to do some deep breathing, it will put you to sleep. If you have a difficult boss, anybody have a difficult boss? Yeah. And you have to meet with your difficult boss. Do this before you go in and meet with your difficult boss. It keeps you in the prefrontal cortex, your cognitive thought area, as opposed to your fight, flight, or freeze center, your amygdala. That's what helps us do this. If you are having a stressful day, and yes ma'am, I'll get you just a second. If you're having a very stressful day and you want to make sure you're in the right place for your child that you're reading with that day, do this in the parking lot for a couple minutes. Do it while you're driving. Just please don't close your eyes. That's why I don't teach my cops to close their eyes, but you guys can do it. So this is just something I want you to incorporate in your life. It's not only good for Lead to Read in your children, but it's good for your life, period. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes, you can say relax. Uh-huh. Right, and what if you couldn't hear her, she said relax on the inhale, or release on the exhale. Whatever mantra you want to add to that, you can add, I am strong, I am loved. Whatever it is that you want to incorporate into your life, that's a good time to do it. It's a really good time to do it. So I like to bring that up just because this is a life changer. I know that sounds silly. Those kids will tell you it's silly. I promise you that. I've taught this to my young son, and sometimes he can't do it. I'll say, breathe, Matthew. Then I know he's really upset, and I got to hug on him for a little bit, and then we'll get him to breathe. But it is really a life changer. I do it myself, believe me. All right, so let's talk some ideas. I told you about the trigger, so let me give you some ideas. Don't wear perfume or cologne on at least your very first day of reading, okay? Very first day of reading. Or if you do, pay attention to the response of the child. If you see a very stressed out child, just keep in mind that could be a trigger, and maybe you don't wear it the next day, the next time you read with them. So the way I do it, I told you don't do it. I've changed it since I've developed this. I will do it on the second reading. You mix them up any way you want to. So the first reading I wear it, second reading I don't wear it. I'll see if I notice any sort of reaction difference. But just know that cologne or perfume can be a trigger. Don't smoke on the way to read. I don't know if you have any smokers or chewers, tobacco chewers in here. I have been both in my life. I'm not telling you that for health reasons, but don't do it for health reasons. But really don't do it on your way to reading that day. Because, once again, that can be a very big trigger to somebody who's been assaulted. And if you think you're doing it and then you're just covering it up with gum, remember what gum does. The flavor of gum and or candy can also be triggering. So there's just things you really want to keep in mind. Don't touch without permission. I told you about my mistake with that one son, or that one boy. I have not made that mistake again. And usually, I told you we got to that point with Adriana where we had to get to that happy medium because she wanted that connection. And I didn't ask her we could touch feet. I just allowed her feet to touch mine. I put it close enough that she could touch it. And then I know I just never pulled it away. So I let her have that. Don't get frustrated. That's what the breathing will help you with, because Shauna was my test. Adriana was a breeze. I mean, I said, hey, this Lead to Read stuff's really, really easy. And then I got introduced to Shauna. And it's just as fulfilling with Shauna, but it was not easy. It was not easy. And if I had not been in the right frame, I could easily have gotten frustrated with her, because my guess is she does with all adults in her life, but she would test me in any way she could possibly find to test me.
Like giving it down.
Not reading at all. Not doing what the teacher and then me having to step in and asking her to do. Anything, most typical 7, 8-year-olds who are being defiant. And you don't want to get frustrated, because that's possibly the reaction they get on a daily basis, right? I know with some of these teachers it is. I've seen some of our teachers in our schools. So, and it may be the same thing at their house. So just do whatever you can not to get frustrated. Keep your readers informed if you're going to miss. Adriana did not matter. I mean, she loved me to death. She said, you should send me notes every week. I love you. Thank you so much. And if I missed, she understood that. Now, Shauna, on the other hand, this is what happened last year. I knew I was going to miss. It was week 5, and I knew I was going to miss. So I told her week 4, Shauna, I will not be here next week, just so you know. I promise I'll come back the following week. She's okay, I understand. So the next week came by, and I already had a partner for her and everything. The next week came by, and they pulled me aside and said, how do you do that? She was a nightmare. She was so mad that you were not here. I said, I told her I wasn't coming. She goes, she didn't know. She said she didn't know you weren't coming. So that made me think, and I had to go back to my own self and say attachment issues. And we have remember the attachment issues a lot of these children may have. So the next time I missed, I started 3 weeks out. I had on my calendar exactly what I was going to miss. I had 3 weeks out, and I warned her every single week. And then I introduced her to whoever's going to cover for me, and I introduced them to her for 2 weeks. It didn't actually matter because she ended up changing the last day. But then the last thing I did, and it's something I didn't do the first year, but I learned last year, is I made sure I sent a little note with Tim Hernandez, the other police officer, said, will you please give Shauna this note? And it made all the difference in the world. Because then when she said, because she did say, he said, he did not tell me he's not going to be here. And she handed him the note and said, he wanted me to make sure you had that. It was nothing more than a note saying, Shauna, I'm sorry I had to miss again. I know we already talked about this. I'm sorry I had to miss again this week. I promise I'll be back next week. You're doing a great job. Please be great with the person today, and you can tell me all about it next week. And then I made sure I showed up next week. I could have been with 112 fever. I would have been in that school. Because can you imagine if I had not shown up that next week after I promised her I was going to be there? And that's things we have to worry about. Maybe you've never thought about before. And these are just all ideas. You latch onto the ones that make sense to you. If none of them make sense to you, please don't worry about it. That's to keep your word. And do be flexible. The reason I say be flexible, remember Adriana was reading very, very high. So how do we keep her involved? We came up with little games. I told you all that she wanted to look at my phone. Yes, you can look at my children. We'll talk about my children. However, you have to read. And then she goes, all right, you read too then. So we had to come up with a game to see who could read a page faster. I'd have my stopwatch off. And she actually beat me twice. That's how good of a reader she was. But it's stuff like that just to keep them involved. Remember, you want them involved. You're not teaching them reading. This is a soft literacy program, but you want to teach them the importance of reading and how reading can be fun. What's more fun than playing a game, right? I think there's a video. I got to look at my notes. All right. So this last one, kind of a depressing video, but it's really not. I'll tell you why it's not depressing at the very end. So just be patient with me on it.
Looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather and fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye.
Have you actually got a driver's license? I don't think so.
Go back where you came from. Learn to speak English.
Go back where you came from.
Is that what you think?
All right, so why is that not depressing? Because that last scene. Remember, we can't control what these children have seen their entire life, what they're going home to that day, but for 30 minutes every week, you can control what they see. And don't think for a minute that you're not making a difference in these children's lives. By being there, you're showing them love, you're showing them commitment, you're showing them they have somebody they can lean on and trust. And they will mimic that. They will mimic that, just like they would mimic all the other bad behaviors that you saw. All right, I'm going to shut up, and maybe if I can get this to change. All right, there's a slide that says questions. So I'm going to shut up and say questions. Wow, I covered it all. You guys are awesome. Yes, sir.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from peers at all the different schools about the impact of the program is making, whether it's trauma related or just?
No, they love it. Every single teacher I've talked to, even though I just go visit a school and I know it's a Lead-to-Read school, they love the program. First of all, it gives them a 30-minute break. It really does, let's be honest. If the teacher takes advantage, and sometimes, even if it's just her or him sitting at the desk watching you read, don't think that they don't get a chance to take a deep breath and finally relax, because they have, 30 kids per classroom pretty much in Kansas City School District, and that's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids. So the ones I've talked to all love the program. Miss Madden, my teacher from first year, she really loves it because she's gonna put you to work. She had us up there singing and dancing and everything else you can think of. And she's the one who has she has the high literacy level in her classes. Anything else? Okay, if you ever come across any questions, let me see if I can change this because my email is up here. No, it's not going to let me do anything. Just let me know. Oh, hold on. We may have it. Yes. My email and my cell phone. Please feel free to call me anytime. Say, hey, I ran across this. Have you ever seen any literature on this? Or you say, hey, I want to know more about brain development of kids or trauma or whatever. I can give you book after book, videos after videos, websites after websites. And it's really good information. You don't have to be a psychotherapist to know this stuff. It's just good to understand what's possibly going on and things you can do to make it better for them. All right. So that's no questions. I'm done. Thank you very much for having me.